What's up everyone? In this video we will get more practice with basic CSS selector, CSS box model, as well as learn a couple of new properties and selectors. So let's begin. We're going to kick things off with some HTML, and the idea would be to write an HTML for the page that has a simple heading and a couple of articles. So let's begin. First we're going to write a header element, and inside of the header element we're going to create h1 that says web dev is awesome. Cool. Right below the header, we're going to create a couple of articles. And the first article is just going to be about the HTML, let's say, and we're going to write the h2, and it's going to say HTML. Perfect. Inside of that, we're going to create the paragraph, and we're just going to write some Latin text in that. Cool. So let's go ahead and copy that article and paste it right below that one. Perfect. And change the HTML to be CSS. Save it, refresh the page. Perfect. So over here we see that we have the simple heading, couple of articles, one about the HTML and another one about the CSS. Well, notice how everything is not styled and shifted to the left. Well, our goal is to make it look better, give our elements some background color, as well as style our articles. And we're not going to make a perfect looking page. That's not our goal. Our goal is to get a little bit more practice with selectors. So let's begin by styling our header. So what I want to do is just to make our header centered and just give it some border at the bottom. So first thing that we're going to do is we are going to be using the element selector, and we're going to target our header. So let's go ahead and type in header, and then we are going to make the text look centered. So what do we need to do for that? Well, in order to make the text look centered, there is a specific property for that, and that property is called text align. So what this property is going to do, it will basically align your content if it doesn't fill the whole space on the page. So the web dev is awesome doesn't fill the whole space on the page, so it has some space on the right. So what this text align property is going to do is it will basically align that text with respect to the page. So let's go ahead and choose center, save it, refresh it, and now we see that web dev is awesome is going to be completely centered. So now let's go ahead and just give the header border at the bottom, and for that we can use the border bottom property. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to type in border bottom, and we're going to do 1px solid black. Perfect. Save it, refresh the page, and now you're going to see that we have that little line at the bottom of our header. So let me just buy some space for our CSS. That sounds about right. Perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to style our article. So how are we going to style it? Well, one way we can do it is by giving our article classes. So let's begin by doing that. We're going to do class, and the class is going to be web article. And we're going to copy the whole thing, and we're going to add the exact same class for our second article. Perfect. Let's go ahead and target that in our CSS. So what we're going to do is we're going to say dot web article. Remember that we need dot when we use the class selector. And for our articles, let's go ahead and give it some background color as well as some width and padding. So we're going to do background color. Let's go with gray. Why not? And we're going to go with width. For width, I'm actually going to be using percentages. So I'm going to do 80%, and we'll talk about that in a second, as well as I'm going to give it some padding on each side, and I'm going to give it 5 pixels. So let's go ahead, save the page, and save the CSS file and refresh the page. And now we're going to see that our articles have a background color of gray. So why did I choose width of 80%? Well, width of 80% is pretty much going to take approximately 80% of the parent element. So if our articles are going to be both inside of the body, and the body takes the 100% of the page, it will pretty much calculate 80% of the width of the body element, and it will apply it to our web articles. So our web articles are pretty much going to be 80% of the width of the body element. So that's going to be pretty convenient, because as we change the width of our page, our width of the article is going to change as well. So let's go ahead and return back to normal. And as you can see, our article is taking 80% of the page, but they're still close together to each other. So how do we space the elements inside of our page? Well, remember, to space our elements apart, we can use the margins. So we need to do two things. We need to space our elements apart as well as center our articles. So for that, we can use the margin property. And for margin, we're going to give it, let's go ahead and give it 5 pixels, or let's go with 10 pixels on the top and the bottom. And we're going to go with auto on the side. And remember, the auto property is pretty much going to align our content on the center of the page. So let's go ahead and save it and refresh it, and boom, we see that our articles now at the center. The margin property auto on the sides will pretty much split the remaining space equally between the two sides of the element. And then we have the 10 pixels on the top and the bottom. So we have that 10 pixels distance between the HTML article and the header, and we have the 10 pixels distance between the HTML and CSS. Perfect. Another thing that we can do is we can give it the border radius property to let's give it 10 pixels so that our articles just have a bit rounded corners. So let's go ahead and save it and refresh the page. Perfect. So now next thing that I want to do is center our headings inside of each article. So how can we do it? Well, we have several options. The first option is going to be to use our element selectors, right? So we can totally do the following. We can target the H2, and what we can say is we're gonna be using that text align property so that we can align the text inside of our element, and we can use center, and we can save it and refresh the page. Perfect. So that will definitely work. But think about that. What if we have another H2, just like random H2 on the page over here, and we're going to save it and refresh the page? Well, now that H2 is also going to be centered. What if we don't really want that? What if we really want to target these specific H2 elements? Well, for that, another thing that we can use is we can totally give it the class, right? And we can say let's say article heading. Perfect. And we can totally use that class over here, and we can say article heading, because this is a class selector, and we can give it the text align property, and we can say center, and let's just comment this part out to see if it works and refresh the page, and that will totally work. So that will only target the H2s with the class of article heading. So it will only target the HTML, and well, it doesn't target the CSS because we didn't move the class to that CSS heading. So let's do that real quick, and we're going to save it and refresh the page again. So now it will actually apply to CSS and HTML heading, but it won't target this HTML, the second HTML heading. Let's just say instead of the HTML, we're going to say random heading. Perfect. Save it, refresh the page, and now the random heading is not going to be targeted. Well, it's not really convenient to give the classes for each of the headings. So another thing that we can do is we can actually use CSS combinators for that. Basically, CSS combinators is something that we will use to explain relationship between our selectors. So it will save us the hassle of creating another class and attaching it to the element and targeting it inside of our CSS file. Instead, we will be using the combination of classes and elements to target specific element on the page. So let's have a look at that. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to remove that first two rules that we wrote. I'm going to remove classes from our headings. Perfect. I'm going to save the file and refresh the page. Perfect. Now every single heading that we have in our articles is not going to be centered. So let's explore CSS combinators. And there are 4 different CSS combinators that are available for us. So the first one is going to be Descendant Selector. And we are going to be using spaces in order to write that. So let's go ahead and explore it. And the way that the Descendant Selector works is it will target descendants of a specified element. So what we can do is we can use the web article, the .web article, our class selector, and we can actually combine it with the element selector using that space, using Descendant Selector. So let's go ahead and combine it with H2. So now how this is going to work, since this is Descendant Selector because we use space, and it will target all H2s that are descendant of the web article. So basically all H2s that are within the .web article or within the web article class. So let's go ahead and just we're going to do the text align centered. And let's go ahead and save and refresh the page. And notice how all of our headings are going to be shifted to the center. And the reason for that is because we are targeting all the H2s that are descendants of the elements with the web article class. So let's go ahead and count the H2s that are descendants of the web article class. So over here we have the first H2 on line 16, HTML, because this is the child of article that has the web article class. And then we have that random heading on line 18, because this is also a child of the element with the class of web article. Next, we have another H2 on line 23, and this is it. So we have total of 3 H2s that are descendants of the element with the web article class. Notice another thing. What if I just wrap our random heading inside of the div? Well, if I save the page and refresh it, what I'm going to see is that random heading is still going to be centered. Well, the reason for that is because Descendant Selector is going to target all H2s that are inside of the article with that web article class, right? So it will target that random heading because that random heading is still within the element with web article class. Well, to get rid of that problem, what we can do is we can use the child selector. So the second CSS combinator is going to be called child selector. And the way that we're going to be using it is by using that greater than sign. Let me just add some spacing for more clarity. And let's go ahead and use the exact same example with our web article and H2s. So instead of the space that we had previously, what we're going to do is we're going to write that greater than sign. And let's just go ahead and comment out the previous stuff, but we will keep it for the reference, save it, refresh the page, and notice how everything is going to be shifted. Well, not everything, but just random heading, right? But let's talk about that. So the child selector is only going to apply to the H2s that are direct descendant of the web article. So it will not apply to H2 over here on line 19 to that random heading because it's not the direct descendant. It's not the direct child of an article. The article has only, this article on line 15 has only 3 direct children. And it's going to be div on line 18. It's going to be that paragraph with some Latin. And it's going to be the heading with the H2. But H2 on line 19, that random heading, is not going to be the direct child of the article over here on line 15. It's going to be the descendant, but not the direct descendant. It's not going to be the child of that article. Thus, child selector will help us by targeting direct children of a specific element. And another 2 combinators that we're going to be talking about is going to be a Json Sibling Selector. So let me just write it as a comment. It's going to be a Json Sibling Selector. And the last one is going to be General Sibling Selector. So General Sibling Selector. Perfect. So let's talk about those 2 really quick. Well, with a Json Sibling Selector, you can target an element that follows directly after another specific element. So, for example, if we want to target all P elements that follow directly after an H2 element, what we can do is we can use the H2, and then the symbol for the Json Sibling Selector is going to be the plus, and then we're going to be targeting all P elements that follow all H2, so I don't know why I wrote H1, and we can do color, and we're going to say red. So let me just write this over here. So for a Json Sibling Selector, we're going to be using a plus sign. And let's talk about the color property. We haven't really explored the color property much. So the color property is pretty much going to change the text of an element. So it's going to change the text of all P elements that directly follow the H2 elements, and it's going to change the color of that text to be red. So let's go ahead and save the page. And over here, what we see is that our text inside of the web article is going to turn red. So once again, let's take a look at our HTML. Since our P elements follow directly after H2s for both of our articles, it will target those P elements and change the color to be red. But notice, as soon as I add just a div, empty div, nothing else, to the first web article and save it, notice that it's not going to be red. Why is that? Well, the reason for that is because that P element is not going to be following directly after that h2 with HTML inside of it because it has div between them. So it's not going to be that JSON sibling. But if we want to target that P element that is not the JSON sibling, well, we can use the general sibling selector. And for general sibling selector, we're actually going to be using that weird symbol, that tilde. And let's go ahead and copy the code that we had previously and paste it right below over here. And we're going to change the plus to use that tilde sign. So if we're going to be doing that, and let me just comment this portion out, if we're going to be doing that, now all the siblings of H2, all P siblings of H2 are going to be with the color of red. So let's go ahead and save it and refresh the page. And now we see that no matter how many divs I put between the H2 and the P, our text is still going to be red. That's the reason. The reason for that is because that P is going to be the sibling of that H2. And one thing to note here is that it will only select sibling P elements after the H2. So after H2. And if I put the P right before the H2, it will not actually apply styling to the P before the H2. As you can see over here, the color is going to be black, while this P is going to be red because the general sibling selector as well as a JSON sibling selector, they will only target P elements that follow that H2 element. And don't worry if you feel a little bit shaky on when to use CSS combinators. It will come with practice. The more selectors and CSS rules you write, the more use cases you will see for CSS combinators. Basically, look for possibilities to clean up your CSS code with the use of combinators instead of extra class selectors. So this is going to be it for this video. And in the next video, we're going to be learning about pseudo classes. So stay tuned and I'll catch you later.